Good morning, everybody. Okay, so we had discussed about some very basic concepts about object orientation, and we also used it as opportunity to look at the UML class diagrams. We looked at how code can be generated or what code corresponds to specific UML class diagram constructs. I hope that what we discussed last class is clear. If anybody has any difficulty, today towards the end we will take the questions. In any case, you should be able to email to me your specific doubts, and we will respond to that. Now today we will discuss about the life cycle models for object oriented software development. That is what we will start with. The estimated time for this topic is about 20 to 25 minutes, 20 minutes let us say. And this topic actually initially we had not included, but then in our interaction session some of you mentioned that we should discuss this topic, and that is the reason why we are discussing the life cycle models for object oriented software development. Now before we look at object oriented software development life cycle, let us first understand that what is wrong with using waterfall model for object oriented software development. Waterfall software development was considered to be a good model long back, and that time the development practices, I mean the development problems and practices were very different from what it happens now. If you look at 40-50 years back, all software were developed from scratch and projects were multi-year long. But over the years, there is heavy reuse from existing software, especially in object oriented software development. We reuse lot of things that have been developed by others in other projects and in libraries. And also in object orientation, we need to, once the objects are, the classes are ready, we need to integrate and test them. In the waterfall model, the integration and system testing was towards the end, and that used to cause lot of problem. Many problems used to get discovered very late. For example, technological things that were thought to work together did not, only could be seen during integration. There were conceptual problems, conceptual understanding about the project. The delivery used to be only at the end of 1 or 2 years, and when the customer saw that, it said, did you do like this? We wanted it the other way. And also the projects were long and personnel used to leave the projects halfway. By the time the project starts and ends, 10 to 20% of the original members used to stay, the rest others would have left, and therefore documentation was very important. But now, as we know that the projects are short, typically 2 months, 3 months, even 1 month, and therefore manpower turnover, personnel is not such a big problem. They stay at least 2-3 months, and then we have incremental delivery and also evolution. We look at these two terms, and therefore the customer gets to see the work as it progresses, gets to use it and can give feedback. End stage problems are less. So let's look at this, that waterfall model has major problem in today's development situation, and that's the reason the other development practices have now been widely adopted in industry and in academics. This cartoon says the amount of documentation that is produced in the waterfall model. Every project produces huge amount of documentation, and even there, remember, there are some programs which can automatically generate lot of documents, module header and so on, huge documents. And some statistics says that a typical developer spends more than 50% of the time just doing documentation. And the reason why documentation was so vital, as we were saying, that it used to help in continuity. If one developer leaves the organization, the others have something to start with, and also the documents could be reviewed and so on. But then we had this incremental model. As the name says, the entire problem is split into small parts and developed in increments. So, in this model typically the requirements are obtained, and once the requirements have been done, they are split into requirements increments, incremental requirements, and then there is a design for the entire one, and then the increments are implemented, validated, integrated with previous increments, and then this cycle goes on. So, it is developed in increments, and it is possible that at the end of every increment it is given to the customer for deployment. For example, the financial system might be implemented first, and then maybe the personnel system, maybe the stores, and so on. So, it was a incremental delivery as well, and then the final system is obtained. But then the increments sometimes may not correspond to something that is deliverable. It may be some functionalities which are internal to the system and does not result in a use case which the customers can use. If we look at it, we have this high level analysis, and based on that we split it into small slices, and these slices are incrementally developed, and with a few slices maybe we can deploy at the customer site and say that, see, the accounts part is now ready, you can start using it. Meanwhile, we are doing the stores part or the personnel part, and we will deploy it next. And typically it used to happen that the core functionality is deployed first, and successive increments might add and fix functionality, bugs may be reported. So, it is tested thoroughly by the customers and they can give their feedback, and the final increment is the complete product. And each increment used to be a soft mini project. The separate life cycle, maybe waterfall model, can be followed for each increment. This diagram captures the incremental delivery scenario. So, the first increment as life cycle is started. So, once the initial project requirements have been obtained, these have been split into increments, and then the incremental development, first incremental development, second increment development and delivery, and so on. If we look at the incremental process, it is initial requirements, and then incremental delivery plan, and then there is iteration here in developing different increments, and as the final increment is given, the system is completely developed. But then we also had this incremental and iterative development. This is also the name given to evolutionary development. We will just look at this. These two terms are often used interchangeably, incremental and iterative. The reason why it is called iterative is that small increments are given to the customer, much smaller than the incremental delivery model, and also the customer feedback is obtained about how to refine the requirements. And here, unlike the incremental model, the initial requirements may not be fully obtained. The requirements evolve as the development proceeds. And we had examples here: rational unified process, extreme programming. We look at these models, and this model is slightly older. Initially, the incremental and iterative development was proposed at IBM in 70s and 80s, and later the rational unified process and the extreme programming came. So, these follow the incremental and iterative development, which is also sometimes called as evolutionary model, but evolutionary is slightly broader term, largely attributed to Tom Glib, who took ideas from incremental and iterative model. And here we do not get the complete requirements initially. We just start with some core features, small requirements, and the requirements evolve as the system development proceeds. and here also we keep on giving small increments to the customer, getting feedback, modifying the given requirement, refining it, and so on. And here in the evolutionary, we start developing small core functions which can capable of performing some useful work which will be useful to the customer, and keep on giving incremental delivery, and typically every week or so. Unlike the incremental model where it may be several months, or maybe incremental and iterative development where it may be 2 weeks or a month. So, here it is much more frequent delivery, and the initial development small system keeps on growing, and as customer feedback is obtained, they also get refined here. This type of development has now gained acceptance at the cost of the waterfall model, and the main reason is that a long project is no more there. Projects are very short, and also the business dynamics has changed. The requirements keep on changing. There is a study by Capers Jones on 8,000 projects who said who concluded that 40% of the final requirements are arrived only after the development has begun. So, the assumption of the waterfall model that requirements have to be fully obtained, signed off as a contract document, and development proceeds from there after costing on that and so on, that assumption has problems, because the customer realizes requirements and the business changes by the time the system development takes place, and 40% of the requirements come only after the development has started. And also in almost every development, especially for object oriented development, we need to plan a little, design a little, and code a little. So, some classes are developed, designed, coded, tested, and so on. The evolutionary model also offers many other advantages. The customer gets more and more functionality, so they get accustomed to the system. They can even give it to their customers, so that market is created, and they use the actual software, and they can report any bugs which get fixed when the developers are still there. The iteration is typically 2 weeks or even 1 week, and we will see that under the evolutionary and agile umbrella there are many development methodologies. So, each of them prescribe the iteration length, maybe 1 week, 2 week, 4 week, and so on. So, unlike the waterfall model, they do not freeze the requirements, but the requirements evolve. So, the waterfall model, we started with the requirements, and then we did the design, coding, testing until the final product was developed. But here we have small increments, design only for that part, and then proceed, and there are several of these, and the customer requirements are obtained in between. Just see here are requirements. So, the system evolves. If we have to show it in a schematic diagram, we can draw like this, that initially we start with some outline description, not the complete requirements, and then as we proceed we obtain further requirements and refine the existing requirements, develop and validate. This cycle continues for every iteration. The initial version is given, and then the successive intermediate versions and the final version. So, if we look at it, we see that it has features of the incremental delivery, the incremental model that we discussed at the beginning, but a pure incremental model starts with the complete requirements, and it only splits them into slices and keeps on developing and delivering incrementally. And here it has the characteristic of a evolution, start with some basic requirements, and the requirements keep on changing, and as the system at the customer side appears to be evolving from a very primitive system to more sophisticated system. And under this evolutionary development, we have this important agile models. Now, let us look at the agile models. This is actually umbrella term, and as I was saying that several different methodologies have come up under the agile umbrella. All of them are called agile models, and we will see why they are called agile, differences and so on. The agile software development was proposed to keep up with the time. The projects are small duration. The project requirements come very dynamically. Initially, the customer may not be able to visualize the system and so on. And also there is a lot of reuse. The extent of reuse varies from project to project. Some projects are only tailoring an existing project called as the services projects, where the company has a product, but for customer it just tailors it, and the agility, the speed is achieved here by avoiding things that waste time. So what is considered to be wasting time? One is of course the documentation, long design cycles, long plan cycles and so on. This is a cartoon by Scott Adam, Dilbert cartoon, and as you were saying that these cartoons depict the software development situation very accurately. Just see here, the manager says we are going to try something called as agile programming. That means no more planning, no more documentation, just start writing code and complaining. So that is the understanding of the manager about the agile model. Partly true that the planning is substantially reduced, documentation is substantially reduced, writing code is important, and then the feedback from the customers and so on. So the engineers are feeling very happy, and they are saying that we always wanted to do this, we never wanted to do documentation, design and so on. All the agile models have some common ideology. The ideology is that individual interactions are very important. Rather than using a very rigid process, interacting through documentation, face to face interaction is very important. Tools help, but they cannot replace face to face interaction among developers. And in a waterfall model, the progress of the development is measured in terms of documents produced. If you remember, in waterfall model we had milestones. The project manager places milestones, and the progress of the project is measured in how many milestones have been reached, and each milestone typically is production of some document. Customer collaboration in all agile methods is very important. In earlier older methodologies, we had the customer requirements obtained from the customer, signed off, and that is the end of interaction with the customer. That becomes a legal document, and the customer is said that, see, we are taken all your requirements, now we are going to develop this software in a year or something, and then we will give you the full software. But here in agile we need customers participation, and there is no signing off and so on. The customer can change the requirements, and here responding to changes in requirements and so on, rather than making a complete plan for the project, setting up milestones and seeing that whether milestones are met. As I was saying that there are a large number of agile methodologies which have come up. Extreme programming is very popular. Scrum is increasingly becoming popular. Unified process, many object oriented development proceeds in unified process, Crystal, DSDM, Lean and so on, and many agile methodologies under the common umbrella of the agile development, and we looked at the ideologies of the agile development, on all of these fit into that. Let's see what the Dilbert cartoon says here. So the engineer comes up to the project manager and says, we need 3 more programmers. So the manager heard about agile programming. He said, see, you don't need engineers, you just use agile programming methods, because these are the terms he had heard. And then the engineer says, agile programming doesn't mean doing more work with fewer people. Then the manager says, if that is not, then you find me some other term that will mean that, and then ask me again, I'll tell you, do that term. We had seen the ideologies, but let us see some principal techniques which are also common to all these agile methods. We will look at few of the agile methods in more detail, but these are some principal technologies common to all these agile methods. All of these start with user stories. The user stories are not rigorous requirements, they are something that the user said in narrative, and typically not even a use case. They are simple descriptions called as user stories, and based on the stories the developers propose a common vision of what is required, their understanding of the system, and that is called as the metaphor. And then they develop small increments to see what are the potential solutions, and the customer feedback is obtained, and these are called as spikes. The spikes are developed when things are not clear and given it to the customer to give comments, and based on that the solutions are worked out. And here giving working software is most important, as we said, we looked under the ideologies. So initially code is only given, design is very less, but then after the customer accepts the code is refactored without affecting its behavior to improve its structure, that is design, to improve its efficiency and so on. These are afterthoughts. Initially the code is given, and then later the design, efficiency, structure and those things are. So as we said that each time only a small feature is implemented, designed and implemented, and therefore only plan for 1 week or so is made, no long term plans, and each iteration typically takes week, 2 week or 4 week depending on the specific methodology, and these are called as time boxes. And at the end of the time box, whether it is 1 week or 2 week, some increment has to be delivered to the customer. And as I was saying that face to face communication is considered very important here. And when you think of face to face communication, the team size needs to be small, because if you have hundreds of developers, how can face to face communication happen? And therefore inherently these are small projects. Then you will ask that how can we use agile model for larger projects where there are hundreds or thousands of developers? Nowadays we don't have projects where hundreds and thousands of developers work on a single project, first of all. And the second is, this can be divided into small projects. A large project can be divided into small projects, and then agile development can be attempted on these small parts, but then the team size for each one is typically kept small. Now this is a research result given by Scott Ambler, and his contention is this, that when a team communicates, they use variety of means of communicating with each other, but what is the effectiveness of the communication? And they concluded that a paper communication through documents is the least effective. Audio tape slightly better, email conversation even better, video tape still better, phone conversation, video conversation. And just see here, on the most effective communication is face to face communication, but even better is face to face communication with a whiteboard. So this is what the agile methods prescribe: face to face communication with whiteboard among team members, rather than writing a document and giving another person to read, which will be not only time consuming, slow, but also it is not very effective. Are there no documents produced in agile methods? No, documents are produced, but then only few of them. And but then what documents are produced? The documents is decided by the project manager, and typically these are documents which has to be developed for others to understand the system, and these are not developed and slowly refined and so on, typically produced after software works. So the effort in changing the document is almost not there. So the valid reasons to document may be that the stakeholders should need the document, users manual and so on. To support communication with external group, maybe some parts of the project, this is part of a larger project and other things are getting developed at other places. We need to have documents for them and to think something through. These are the reasons why agile documentation is produced. Frequent delivery every few weeks, called as time boxes. Customer suggestion for requirement change is easily accommodated. Typically, the customer is also required to be part of the developing team. Some customer representatives should be there as the development team, so that the customer's requirements can be better understood, and face-to-face communication among development team members. And as the requirements are obtained from the customer, these are all the set of requirements, and the requirements are prioritized. Which one to do next is decided based on customer feedback and also its importance, and based on that, from the stack of requirements, the top ones are picked up. But as I was mentioning, that here there is no plan driven development process, so that a developer is asked that you are given this task for 2 months, you complete within 2 months and so on. Here the developers should know how to go about very short iterations, inhibit long term planning. So the developers need to be more mature, and also since documents are less, there are chances of misinterpretation, reviews are difficult to get, and also after the project is complete, documents are produced, but then there may not be enough documentation for the maintenance team unless there is sufficient care is taken. So this is a point to point comparison between a agile and a plan driven process like a waterfall model. Maybe I should have asked it as a quiz and got your answer, but then we have very less time. I wanted to complete in 20 minutes. We have still many things to discuss on the life cycle model. So please read the other slide, not spend time. Now let me just ask this quiz. How is the agile model different from waterfall model? What are the principal ways in which agile model differs from a waterfall model? We all know waterfall model, and we looked at the ideologies of all the agile models. So how do they differ? So we had discussed all these, that in place of long term planning, here it is incremental delivery, and in waterfall model progress is measured in terms of how many documents are developed. Here it is measured in terms of the number of working functionalities that have been deployed at the client side. Now let's focus for next 5-10 minutes on extreme programming and the unified process. Extreme programming has become very widely used agile model, and unified process is very important for object oriented development, and it is also quite popular. So there is another quiz here. What are the advantages of the evolutionary model? We had discussed this, that the requirements change frequently, we can accommodate the customer feedback, the system is tested frequently, and so on. Now this is the Dilbert's understanding of the extreme programming. Let's see here. This is the project manager says we are going to try something called as extreme programming, and they are the developers, and says first pick a partner. The two of you will work at one computer for 40 hours a week. So that is called as pair programming. That is correct, that we have this pair programming under extreme programming model. And then Ashok is a good programmer, and just see here everybody is trying to take Ashok as the partner in the pair programming team. And then Wali, he says the system is a minute old and I already hate everyone. Extreme programming was proposed by Kent Beck in 1999, and the name is taken from the fact that this model recommends taking the best prices to the best practices to the extreme level. In development, what works well, we should try to do more of it. So that's the idea here. If something is good, we know that it is good, why not do it all the time? For example, let's see what are the things that are good and how they are taken to the extreme. Okay, before that, there is another Dilbert cartoon. The project manager says we will be adopting the best practices in our industry, just like everyone else. So then the engineers ask this question: if everyone is doing it, best practice is the same as mediocre. Valid point, yes. And then the manager gets angry, says, stop making mediocrity sounds bad, even though he's contradicting. What are the best practices? Okay, so communicating among team members, simplicity. So try to solve something simple rather than starting off with something complicated. Do not pay attention for tomorrow. Just do something simple, and later, if necessary, we will see how to handle that. Feedback. Constantly take feedback from the users, otherwise there is trouble waiting to happen. Courage. If some code is not good, just throw it, write new code. So these are the identified best practices in extreme programming, and let's see how these are taken to extreme. So I might ask a quiz that what are the best practices in agile model, and how are these taken to the extreme in the extreme programming. One thing that every developer knows is that review is good, whether it is code review, design review, requirements review, review is good. So why is review good? If I ask that question, is review better than testing? Yes, review is very effective, because testing, you only know that it has failed, and testing also cannot be used for many artifacts, for example documents and so on. But in review we see what is the problem is identified, whereas in testing the failure is identified. Doesn't say that this is the bug here, says that did not work for this test case, and then we have to find out what exactly was the problem. Whereas in review we can not only find bugs, we can get suggestions how to improve efficiency and so on. So review is accepted to be a good practice. And how is review is taken to extreme in the extreme programming? Okay, so this is taken to extreme through pair programming. In pair programming, there are two programmers who are writing the code. One is writing the code and the other is reviewing it, and every 15 minutes or so they change their location, and the other is programming, and the first programmer is reviewing, and so on. So in a pair programming, two programmers, one is programming coding and the other is just sitting by side and looking at the code and giving feedback whether it is working, are there any problems, can it be done better, and so on. And after 15 minutes or half an hour they change side, and the person who is doing the programming sits back and reviews, and the other starts programming. So review is taken to extreme through pair programming. Testing, continuously write test case, and that is called as the test driven development. So testing is taken to extreme through test driven development. What is test driven development? In test driven development, for every small feature that is planned to be developed, first the test cases are developed. Let me repeat this point, that in test driven development, whenever a feature is planned to be implemented, maybe a small feature or a function or whatever, first the test cases are developed for that before any code is written, and then as soon as the code is complete, they are executed with the test cases. If they pass, then the code is accepted. So in test driven development, the test cases are developed even before any code or design is done. Incremental development. So here new increments are obtained every few days. Simplicity is good, and therefore start with the simplest design that only support the immediate required functionality. Don't plan for what is required after 10 years, 20 years, and so on. They can be taken care as the requirement for them arise. But then why complicate the system from the beginning? And some of them may not be required, the ones that we anticipate after 20 years, they may not even be required. The other best practices that are taken to extreme are design. How is design taken to extreme? Okay, after the code works, bring some design into it, So, that is called as refactoring. So, every day do some refactoring of the existing code. Architecture, which is the high level design, is important. And how is this taken to extreme? A high level architecture called as a metaphor is proposed based on the user stories. How is integration testing taken to the extreme? We must integrate and test several times a day. Unlike the waterfall model, which said that integrate at the end of the project, maybe after a year or two, integration is done. But here, build and integrate and test several times a day, and there is continuous integration every day. As any feature is developed, it is integrated. Listening, these are some of the things that are also considered as good practices. The design, we said that through refactoring, design is taken care, and then feedback from customer requirements by delivery of the working software, and letting the developer have a team member from the customer. Test driven development, as I was saying, that first based on the user story the test cases are developed, and then after it passes, then only it is given to the customer and then refactored and take up the next feature, develop the test cases for that, and so on. Now, let us look at unified process. It was called as rational unified process, and later the rational company was acquired by IBM, and the best practices here are develop iteratively, manage requirements, employ component based architecture, model software visually, continuously verify quality, and control changes. As we see that this model slightly different objectives than a purely agile model. The pure agile model, we had seen that they had some very restricted set of ideologies and they concentrated on that. Whereas here, the ideologies are similar but slightly different here. And many authors, they classify rational unified process as a incremental and iterative development, and it is also classified many times under the agile umbrella. So here, just like the agile model, it's developed through iterations, incremental delivery. Now let's see the phases of the unified process. So each iteration is a mini waterfall, just like the other methods. So it identifies 4 phases, unlike the other purely agile model. Says that development proceeds through 4 phases: inception phase, elaboration phase, construction, and transition phase. Now let's look at it diagrammatically given by the rational documents. So let's see here inception, and the next phase is elaboration, construction, and transition. Even though there is a arrow given here, implying that after this completes, this takes place, but not really. They overlap. That's what the next diagram says. Okay, so this is done for every feature. The inception, elaboration, construction, and transition done for different features, and therefore they overlap. Okay, so we'll see the overlapping. Now, what are done under different phases? Inception phase, produce the initial vision document, initial use case model. The elaboration phase, the use case model is completed, analysis model, the domain model, and so on, which we will today we will see how to go about doing that. And then the construction phase, where we have the test plan, test cases, and we have the complete design document. And then the transition, where it is installed, and so on. So now let's see the overlapping of the different activities. The diagram is given in 2 dimensions in the next slide. One is horizontal axis, which is the life cycle aspects. Okay, the time when the life cycle activities are taken up, and the vertical axis are what are the activities that are taken up. Let's see the diagram. So this is the diagram where there are 4 phases. Then these are the activities. For example, requirements, initially requirements are gathered at a rapid rate, but then just see that the requirements keep on coming throughout the life cycle. Analysis and design is carried out towards the end of the inception stage, initial analysis, and then the design, but it continues throughout. Implementation and test, also there is significant overlap with requirements, obtaining requirements, and implementation and test. Similarly, deployment is also incremental. So these slides, they emphasize, they just explain the inception, what are the different activities, done under inception, what are the things that are required to be complete by the inception phase, requirement capture, cost benefit analysis, scope definition. So, just see here that this unified process has also some features of a plan driven development, risk analysis, project scope definition. Okay, initial use case modeling, this is what is something like agile model, and first pass as the domain model, the project scope definition, initial. Okay, these are not really something exactly as the waterfall model where you fix them completely, freeze the requirements, but here initial requirement capture, project scope definition, and so on. So, what are the activities under elaboration phase? We will today take up some, okay, not today, in the next class, we will take up some problems and see how we can use this unified process in developing solutions. So, we will see that we will start with use case analysis, and then we will try to get the domain model, then the sequence and collaboration diagram, and other diagrams like activity and state diagrams. Finally, we will obtain the code. Okay, we will not do risk assessment, etc., but these things we will do for small projects. The construction phase, mostly the functionalities are coded based on the design, and as it turns out that if the design is done well in UML 2.0, then lot of code can be obtained before actually the programmer starts coding, automatically can be obtained. It can just fill in some of the parts of the program, and then at the end of the construction phase we should have users manuals, integrated software, and finally the transition phase where installation, training, etc. takes place, alpha, beta, and final releases. So, we will not spend time here. Now, we had looked at the agile development, and as part of that we looked at extreme programming model and the unified process. These we said that there are dozen or maybe 2 dozens of agile development methodologies, and all of them in some way or other conform to the ideologies of the agile model. But then among them there is a wide variation. Some have retained some features like phases and so on, like the unified process. The others do not have these phases. So, having phases is something similar to the earlier models, but then all of these fall under the agile model, even though there is some differences from each other with respect to because agile model is umbrella term. The ideologies are given slightly as something ideal, and then these have different methodologies have implemented them in different ways. Now, let us continue with our discussion on UML. So far we have discussed basic concepts on object orientation, and we use that as an opportunity to introduce the UML class diagrams, because those diagrams are very intuitive. Looked at how code can be, Java code can be generated from the UML class diagrams and class relations, and then we looked at the life cycle model for object oriented development, modern life cycle models. We will continue with our discussion on when we started we had not given an introduction to UML. We will just give a brief introduction to UML and we will continue. UML stands for modeling language, unified modeling language. So, just see the term language. A language you use to describe something, it is not a methodology. If you have a design, you can describe in UML, but it does not tell exactly, the UML does not tell how to come up with a design. It is a language which you can use to describe a design that you have come up, and that is a design methodology. The way in which you come up with a design is a design methodology. We will discuss a design methodology, and that design methodology gives us a design which we can represent using UML. But then that design methodology we discuss tomorrow, sorry, in the next class, that is closely tied up with this UML, in the sense that we say that at this time of this methodology use this UML diagram and so on. But if we look at older times, 80s and 90s, there the design methodology and the notations were fixed. So, if you are using certain design methodology, then you will have to use, but here you can use any design methodology, does not matter, and you can use UML as part of that to describe your design. Earlier these were popular design and notation methodology. Each one had separate design methodology and also separate notations. OMT, object modeling technique, Book's methodology, OOSC, object oriented software engineering, Odell's methodology, Slayer, Miller, and so on, dozens of them. And each of them propose different notations and different design methodologies. And therefore, if you are familiar with OMT, you may not understand how design document produced in Book's methodology, what does it mean, or you can't participate in the design method in a company following Book's methodology if you are only familiar with OMT. So it was very difficult. A company might have different methodologies practiced by different projects. So if you transfer one engineer from one project to another project, you'll say that in the other project we are using the Odell's methodology. Now I have to learn this OMT methodology and notations. So it was becoming very difficult, and reuse was very difficult. And with that motivation, the unification was proposed. In the unification, all these existing methodologies were understood, studied, and then the features from there were selected. So just see here, majority of the features of UML has come from OMT. Features from Book's methodology are there. Features from OOSC are there. Actually, the proposers of OMT, Book's methodology, and OOSC were a part of the team which developed UML. And also there are features which cannot be attributed to any of these. So if we see how it has progressed, starting with the initial unification effort, the first UML was, I think, UML version 1 was released in 1998. So initial part is unification. It was getting slowly standardized. But then there were many industry problems it could not solve. For example, use in embedded industry, which is a very important segment of software development, embedded software, it could not be used. For example, they needed to represent timing, concurrency, and so on. And with that motivation, UML 2.0 was released, and still further developments are occurring on UML. So this slide captures the UML 1.0 in 1997, and then various versions of UML kept on coming, and until UML 2.0 was released in year 2003. Okay, I think we'll just take a few minutes break, 5 minutes break, let's say, and we'll just continue from that point. Let us continue from the point that we had just taken a break. So let's ask a very fundamental question, that is modeling design? Is the modeling same as designing? And if that is the case, then why do we need to model? Question that we are asking is that why do we need to model? Is modeling same as design? Is designing involves only constructing models? But what is design in that case? So these are the questions. The first question is that why do we need to model? We need to model because software is complicated. If we just have a text documentation or a requirement specification document, it will be hard to design from, because it is very difficult to understand. Maybe a requirements document can be 100 pages. So we need to construct several types of models based on the requirements document. A model by definition is constructing a simpler representation of the actual thing. A model is an abstraction mechanism, or modeling is representing a simpler form of the system. We concentrate only few important aspects of the requirements and ignore the rest. And depending on what aspects we ignore, we might get different models. And model is considered as an attractive mechanism to handle complexity. And therefore, every software, hardware, etc. have to be modeled. And based on these models, so one thing is that we get different types of models of the same thing. depending on what aspects you are focusing and what aspects you are ignoring. And once we have a simple representation of the system, we can apply some methodologies on these models to design the system. I hope that the answer to these questions, fundamental questions that we asked, is clear. Even in other areas, models are constructed. For example, if you are constructing a large enough house, if it is a one room house, maybe modeling is not required. If it is a multi-storied apartment complex or a house, definitely designs are required. And then the design can come in different forms. We model the required house in terms of its floor plan, in terms of its elevation, in terms of a prototype, and so on. And based on this, we refine the model to come up with the actual design. So once we have the floor plan or elevation plan and so on, we understand how the system will behave. And as we said that given a requirement, we can construct different types of models from it. UML supports the same thing through different views of a system. We have UML diagrams to construct the different views of a system or to model different views of a system. Okay, let's here there is a question. The question is asked by Hemakiran: why less number of programmers are required in agile method than in other implementation models? Are we using the same as we are using the same processes in implementing? So the question that is asked by Hemakiran is that why less number of programmers are required in agile development? One thing is that agile development, it is supposed to save many things that waste effort. For example, we are saying that documentation is very reduced, and in the older methodologies like older life cycle models like waterfall model, typically developer spends 50% time documenting, and here it's hardly 5% or something, and there is saving in rework, because rework at the end is very inefficient, takes a lot of effort and time. Here we have the customer representative in agile models, and then the scope for rework is reduced and so on. But then it is hard to compare that what is the reduction in the number of persons required for the same project. And also we said that the UML, the agile models, they work on very small projects. So a strict comparison of how much reduction and so on is very difficult to come up with such figures. But then the principal reason why less programming effort, less number of persons are required is basically we try to save on things that waste time. I hope that point is clear. Now let's see, there is another chat question. Okay, so there is okay, audio is not clear. So I hope that the team that is taking care of the audio and video, they will try to rectify this problem. Audio is not clear at some center. Okay, so now let's proceed with what we're discussing. We have several views of the system that we can model using UML. User's view. This is the view of the user. The user views the system, and this user's view is captured in the use case model. The structural views, the behavioral view. The structural view is how the system is structured into different classes, components, and so on. The behavioral view, how does the system behave given an input to the system? How does the system behave? Implementation view, how exactly is the system implemented on specific hardware? Different packages and so on. And then in the environmental view, how are the different hardware and so on interconnected, which modules they host and so on. So as this diagram shows, and this diagram in different forms appears in every UML book, the main thing that to see here is that the central view is the user's view. Every development starts with this, the user's view, because the user has given us this task of developing the system. So we must understand and represent diagrammatically how does the system is viewed by the user who is finally going to use the developed system. And typically the use case diagram is used to represent the user's view, and then based on the user's view, okay, so we have some question. The question is by Himakiran. Waterfall model seems to have a lot of drawbacks. Then when do we use it at all? Does industry still practice it? So this is by Geeta. So question from Geeta is that waterfall model seems to have lot of drawbacks. Then when do we use it, and does industry still practice it? Okay. So the answer to it is that waterfall model was heavily used almost in every project about 40 years back, and that time the software development problem was very different. Things were developed from scratch. You are developing an accounting package, the accounting package only for that customer. But over the years, the development problem has changed significantly. Now the software development is more service oriented, in the sense that the company, the developing company has some software which it needs to adapt to a specific customer's need, and that adaptation is basically lot of code is available. You want to just tailor it to some requirement of a customer, reuse lot of code from your existing project, and the development time has become very small. If you look at the projects that were done 30-40 years back, the projects were all long, done from scratch and so on. Now 1-2 month project are very common. So that's the reason why these agile models and have become so widely practiced. But then the question that is asked is that, are waterfall model used at all? Okay, waterfall model may be used for projects where the steps that we take to develop the system is very fixed. We know what exactly we'll do. Possibly we have developed something for one customer, and the same steps we'll do for another customer. No iteration, nothing is required. User feedback is not required because we know that he is going to take it. So under such situations, maybe waterfall model is used, but its use has been reduced substantially. And another area where waterfall model is used is developing critical software. For example, if you go to very hazardous. So, you have to somehow put lot of effort in getting the correct requirements, code it, test it and so on. So, very critical software is also developed using waterfall model. Hope that answers the question, that it is used in, the question was whether it is used and where. So, the question is that it is used very small projects, small number of projects which are either very critical in nature or are very routine in nature. Now, there is another question. Okay. So, the other question, it is by NMMS. So, the question is very interesting. The question is that, are all views having some relation to the programs? Good, interesting question. And these different views of the system should finally translate to code. Yes, or something to do with code. And we will see how. We had seen that class diagram, there is a direct correspondence with the code. But even the other diagrams, for example, sequence diagram, state chart diagram and activity diagram, they also translate to code, and that we will do today. Given a sequence diagram, what does the code it represents? Given a state chart diagram, the code even can be automatically obtained, just like we have done for class diagram. We will do that today. So, there is a few more questions. Okay, there is some chat regarding audio. I hope the team looking at the audio will help them to have the proper audio. Now, let us proceed. So, we are saying that these are the different views, and each view is modeled with some diagrams, but the central view is the user's view, which is typically developed the first in any object oriented design methodology. We first develop the use case view, that is the central view. Now, over the UML 1.0 diagram, we have several new diagrams that have appeared. Initially, we had the structural diagram, behavioral diagram. We had several types of structural diagrams, but now we have this package diagram, the one that is marked star. These are the new diagrams proposed as part of UML 2.0. The timing diagram, we are saying that in embedded applications, timing is important. Interaction overview diagram, and even in the communication and sequence diagram, UML 2.0 differs substantially from UML 1.0. Actually, most of these diagrams, there are new things that have taken place in UML 2.0 or 1.x. As we proceed, we will just remark little bit about that. What are the new features that have we are using now? We are looking at 2.0 diagrams only, but I will just mention what used to happen in 1.0. So, let us look at the structural diagrams, the class, object, component and deployment diagrams. We will look at them. The behavioral diagrams, use case, sequence, collaboration, state chart and activity diagrams. We will look at them. These are some of the quotations, authorities in this area. They answer some fit in every problem you solve. So, what he says is that there are many diagrams, many types of diagrams, many views, but if the problem is simple, you do not need all the diagrams, and even in different projects we might need different diagrams depending on the type of the project. Brian Henderson Sellers, he says, when learning the UML, you need to be aware that certain constructs and notations are only helpful in detailed design, while others are used in requirements analysis. So, this is also very important. What Brian Henderson Sellers says, that as we design, we first come up with an analysis model. We will see that tomorrow in more detail, that how do we come up with an analysis model, and then later we try to come up with a design model from the analysis model, and the design model is close to the code, and sometimes much of the code is obtained directly or automatically from the design model. So, the UML notations etc., that are used in the analysis model are different from what used in design model. That's what Brian Anderson Sellers says. We'll appreciate it better as we proceed to tomorrow, next class. So we don't need all the diagrams and all the views for every system, but the small systems that we will discuss as examples in our discussion, we will need the use case diagram, class diagram, interaction diagram, and sometimes we might need a state chart diagram, and then the deployment diagram, but that's all we'll use. But the other diagrams like activity diagram and so on, they are important for larger real life systems, not in our small problems. You will show them their use in through small examples, but their real power comes with large problems. So these are the key diagrams you are going to construct today. You'll understand them: the use case diagram, the class diagram, collaboration diagram, interaction diagram, activity diagram, and the state chart diagram. That we will concentrate today. First, let's look at the use case modeling. This is the simplest of all, can be developed by somebody who doesn't understand anything about software. It presents the user's view. The use case model consists of set of use cases, and a use case is basically a high level requirement, but then a high level requirement might have many scenarios. Now let's just explain what do we mean by a high level requirement and what are the scenarios. A high level requirement of a system is something using which the user can get some useful work. Let's look at a library automation software. The use cases or the high level requirement in this case may be to issue a book, renew a book, reserve a book, query about availability of a book. So the use cases are typically independent, but then there may be dependency, because unless you have somebody has issued a book, unless somebody has reserved a book, a renew book can proceed. But if somebody has reserved a book, renew book cannot take place. So there is a dependency between reserve book use case and renew book use case. But lot of time the use cases are independent. There is no dependency between use cases. And also each use case consists of a number of scenarios. So use cases, as we said, consists of high level requirements. Each use case is a high level requirement, and a high level requirement is something using which the user does get some work done, meaningful piece of work done. So for a library information system, the use cases can be issue book, query book, return book, create member, and add book. And once we know that these are the use cases, we can represent them in the form of a simple diagram. So each use case is represented in the form of an ellipse, a line, and the user. The line represents the communication relationship or association relationship between the use case and the user or the actor. So this represents the association or users relationship or communicates a relationship between the user and the actor. The name of the software written here, and then what are the use cases drawn as ellipse, and the name of the use case written inside it. So a use case is a high level requirement, but then let me just tell one thing, that a use case consists of a number of scenarios, and let's understand what are the scenarios. Let's take the example of a bank ATM. So you want to withdraw money, and you went to the ATM counter and you inserted your ATM card, and then there may be several things that may happen. One is that your card just asked your password, and then you entered it, it may reject and say that invalid password. Now, suppose you enter the valid password, it asks you what type of account you want to withdraw, how much you want to withdraw, and so on. So, just see that in each use case there is some interaction between the system and the user, and depending the input from the user, the system may do different things. For example, the typical use of ATM card, you go there, specify some amount, get the money and come back. But sometimes you go use the ATM card and it says that, and you try to withdraw some amount, it said that insufficient balance. Sometimes you went there, try to withdraw money, and it says that please specify your amount in multiples of 100. You specified 550 rupees, and it said specify in multiples of 100. Sometimes it might say that, see, we don't have that much cash, and so on. So, it is the same withdraw money use case, but there are different scenarios. So, the first task is to identify the use cases and then to identify the scenarios and to document them. Now, let us look at some exercises, because given a text description like this, developing the use case diagram is the one of the most basic requirements, and we said that does not require too much of skill, even a non-programmer can do it. Let us read through this. It is a video store information system. The video store information system supports the following business functions: recording information about videos and that the store owns, information about a customer's borrowed videos accessed by the staff and also the customer, involves video database searching. Staff can record video rentals and returns by the customer, involves video database searching. Staff can maintain customer, video and staff information. Managers of the store can generate various reports. So, we need to identify what are the use cases here and then represent in the form of a diagram. Later, we need to identify what are the scenarios of each use case, and then document them. And as we said, each use case the user gets some work done. Now, let us see this. Recording information about videos the store owns. So, can the system do this and the customer can get some useful work done? Yes. So, the videos can be entered. The video CDs can be entered into the system. So, register video CD. Information about customer borrowed videos, display borrowed videos. Staff can record video rentals, rent video, register return, create customer, delete customer, and so on. So, given a problem description like this, we will today give you several examples, and tomorrow also will give large number of exercises. Please practice identifying the use cases. Initially, it is non-trivial. So, given a text description to identify the use cases is non-trivial, but then once you are able to do some satisfactorily, you will see that it comes to you effortlessly. So, once you identify the use cases, you can represent them in terms of the ellipse, who is using which use case, and also we had in the requirement written here that the database is searchable by staff and all customers, and also recording video rental involves database searching, and therefore we have drawn this dotted lines here. We will see what it means as we proceed. So, this is a typical use case diagram, but then this will also have to be accompanied by a text description which will give the scenarios of this use case. So there is a okay. So let us proceed. So each use case diagram it represents some features, like what are the features that the user can invoke and so on. So this is a very simple use case model of a tic-tac-toe game. The user can only play move, keeps on playing move until the game ends. Sometimes for a use case, two actors may collaborate. For example, for rental video, the clerk invokes the rent video and takes the customer's credit card details and enters here, and then there is external credit card authorization service which says that whether the credit card is valid or not and whether the video can be rented out. So, the see here for this one use case there are two actors that are collaborating, and also just see here that actor need not be a person. A clerk is a person, but this actor written here in this notation external system. So, this is the external system, but these are also represented by this stick icons. The reason why the UML developers even represented non-humans in this form is that they wanted to reduce the number of symbols. Each symbol we can annotate something, and then this has a special meaning here. This is another use case example. We draw the use cases here for a telephone cataloging, telephone ordering system, telephone catalog based ordering system. So, check status of order, place order, fill orders, establish credit, and so on. These are the different users for the use cases. So, here in use case diagram, we not only identify the use cases, we also identify the different categories of users and what use case they use. So, why is this important? To identify the users for specific use cases. Okay, different users would need different types of interfaces. For example, somebody who is a customer may not know the interface well, so he needs to be given a very simple user interface. But for the same feature, if the clerk is issuing, then the clerk has been using it every day, so he needs a very efficient and fast interface. And also there can be different security mechanisms, authentication and security mechanisms for different features of the system. And also the use case diagram can be used for preparing the user manual. So, let me just ask you this question, that if you have this word processing software, all of you have used word processing software like let us say MS Word, and you understand all the features, just asking you that how will you develop the use case model for the word processing software, let us say Microsoft Word. How will you develop the use case? The answer to it is that you start the software and see that there are menu appears, and under each menu you will find that there are features listed. So, each feature is a use case, and also the menus actually package them into different packages. So, we represent the MS Word software in terms of the use case model in terms of several packages of use cases, and each package contains several use cases. Now, once we have identified the use cases, we need to identify the different scenarios for each use case, and then we need to document. The UML by itself does not prescribe how exactly to prepare the text document, but then there are some practices that have become more or less accepted. One is that we need to define what is the mainline scenario or the basic course and the alternate courses. The mainline course or the basic course is what normally happens, and the alternate courses is that what may happen. For example, in the ATM cash withdrawal example, you go there, insert the card, enter password, enter the amount required. It asks you in what denominations, and then it issues you the amount in that denominations. But then in the alternate scenarios, it might say that you have insufficient balance. That is one alternate scenario. Another alternate scenario may be the cash is not there in the ATM, and so on. The required denominations, it's not there, so on. So for the ATM withdrawal example, we write about for each actor, who are the actors, and then what are the precondition. These are things that must be set up before the use case can start, and what is the end condition after the use case completes. What is the end condition or the post condition. The mainline scenario, as I was saying, that there is nothing really standard, but then these are guidelines, and we will see that there are small variations in the documents prepared by different companies, different authors, and so on. This is one variation. For mainline scenario, we can structure it in terms of the actor action and the system action. So the actor begins when the customer arrives at the use case begins when the customer arrives at the ATM. Customer inserts the credit card, and the system's reaction is that system verifies the customer ID and status, and then customer chooses withdraw operation. The system asks for operation time, enters the cash and amount. System asks for withdraw amount, checks whether the amount is legal in multiples of 100 and so on, and whether he has sufficient balance. System dispenses cash, reduces the withdrawal amount from the account, and prints the receipt. The customer takes the cash and receipt. The system ejects card, and that's the end of this use case. Withdraw. That's the mainline scenario. But then there can be alternate scenarios, alternate flows in the of events. For example, in step 3A, the customer authorization failed. System verifies the customer ID. Step 3A, this is alternate scenario, customer authorization failed. Step 8A, customer has insufficient funds. So in this case, display an error message and go to step 6. 8B, customer exceeds the legal amount, display error message and go to step 6, and so on. And there can be exceptional flow of event, for example, power failure, or the cash machine does not work, and so on. Cash vending machine does not work. So far, we looked at how to develop the use case model, and we said that a use case corresponds to a high level requirement, which essentially means something useful that the user can get done, and each use case consists of several scenarios. One is called as a mainline scenario, which typically happens, and then we have the alternate scenarios. So we represent each use case using an ellipse, and then must have an accompanying document which tells about the different scenarios and the interactions between the actor and the system. And regarding identifying the use case from a requirement document, we see that think of the features that the user will need. There will be different categories of users. Think of what are the categories of users. For example, a library software will have the library members, will have the librarian, will have the accounting personnel, and each user will need some features. So think from the perspective of the users, and then as far as large systems are concerned, we can't just go on having hundreds of use cases. We need to package them. So we'll see just now how do we factor them and package them. Some use cases we need to split into smaller use cases called as factoring. Why do we need to split into smaller use cases? Because some use cases are very complex, and sometimes there is a common behavior across different use cases. We need to represent them. They will help us in our design and understanding the system. So what are the ways to factor? Generalization, include and extend. These are the three facilities given by UML for factoring use cases. One is called as the generalization or the inheritance. We know already what is inheritance. So here there is a parent use case, and the child use case extends the parent use case. This is an example. Let's say student need to register. There are some common steps between the registration of an undergraduate student and a postgraduate student, and these common features are factored here, and then they might require a slightly different data and so on, which are entered here, slightly different behavior. So these are the difference between undergraduate registration and graduate registration. For example, graduate registration, possibly they would have to give a bank account where they will be paid the scholarship. There is undergraduate registration, they don't get the scholarship, something like that. There is another example of a generalization, pay membership fee, and somebody may pay membership through credit card, somebody through library pay card. So paying membership fee, there are many things that are common for which duration you want to pay, what is the registration number and so on. But there is a small difference between these two use cases. The commonality is factored here, only the differences added here, just like in a class inheritance. Include is another way we can factor use cases. In include, one use case includes another use case. Now let's see some examples of that. So this is the representation, dotted line, and we annotate here with include. So this is the base use case, it includes some common use case. So this use case is included in by both of these. So we saw reuse a feature across different use cases. It helps in designing later. For example, issue book and renew book in a library automation software, both need to check whether somebody has reserved. You are issuing it, cannot be issued if somebody has reserved. Similar is renewing it, and then both of these include this feature. Extend is another facility for factoring use cases. In include, some use case was compulsorily included in another use case. Here there is an option. Let's see that. The representation is similar, but then just see here the base use case, the arrow is pointing to base use case, and there is extend written here. It is annotated by extend, the same arrow, but it is in the other direction and also extend is written here. So, what it means is that the base use case may sometime use the common use case. There is option. The base use case may sometime include the common use case, whereas include is compulsory inclusion. Here there is optional inclusion. For example, you are ordering an item on an e-commerce site. Sometimes you know the details of the product and so on, you keep on entering and complete your order. But sometimes you need to see the catalog. You click on another button that is available and that will show you the catalog, so that you can check the product ID, its price, its warranty and so on. So, optionally sometime you need to see the catalog, that is why we written here extend. Please try the exercises yourself, and as I said that if you do 8-10 exercises given an arbitrary text description of an arbitrary system, you should be able to come up with the use case. One thing is that having a large number of use cases in the use case model is not a good idea. We need to package them. So, this is the symbol for package of use case, and as I was saying that in the word processing software, if you look at the menus, they represent the different packages. For example, view is a menu item, top level menu item. Under view there are several features listed, those we will write here. View, there may be edit, maybe file operations, maybe tools and so on. They become packages, and then we write the different use cases under each package. And the first level view of the use case diagram, we show only the packages, and then we show the contents of the packages in subsequent diagrams. As you can see, there is a close correspondence between the graphical user interface and the use case modeling, and that is the reason why many times first a prototype, graphical user interface prototype is developed before a use case modeling is done. So, we can show it like this, the different packages and the users that are using different use cases in the different packages, larger systems, or we can even show them each package separately. So, a high level diagram showing the packages and the users, and then for each package we draw a separate use case diagram. This is how we structure a large system into smaller use case diagrams. This is a style note by Ambler, says that all use cases should be verbs. Even though they do not imply timing, use case diagrams from top to bottom should be in the way the user would use them. The primary actor should appear on the left. So, sometimes we have a use case on which multiple actors interact. For example, we had this issue video CD on which the clerk is the primary actor and he requires help from an external system in validating the credit card. So, the primary actor should appear on the left, and the secondary actors like validate and so on, store and so on, they should appear on the right. Actors are associated with one or more use cases. Do not use arrows on the actor use case relationship. These are only lines, do not use arrows. To initiate scheduled events, include an actor called as time. If there is something which happens every hour or every year or something, must have an actor called as time. So, the time gives the signal. So, this is the secondary actor who gives the signal when that will operate. Do not show actors interacting with each other. one actor, let us say a student gives an application to the clerk and the clerk enters it in the system. Do not draw a line from the student to the clerk, because we are trying to capture interactions with the system. How the actors interact with each other, that's we should not model that. Include should rarely nest more than 2 deep. So even though one use case is broken up into another 2 use cases, don't make it too deep inclusion. Those are the guidelines. So we just managed to finish the use case diagram. Please practice this on the exercise that I have given, and we will continue with the interaction diagram tomorrow. I was hoping that we'll complete it today, but then we'll look at the interaction diagrams and also look at the state chart diagram, and then how to generate code from these diagrams. See, use case diagram, it just helps us to identify the user's view and then the steps, alternate scenarios, and that helps us to develop other diagrams. And also use case diagram is used for designing test cases, as we will see. But then we don't directly generate code from use case diagram, whereas interaction diagrams and so on, we will see how to generate Java code directly from interaction diagrams. So we'll just stop here. you.